Hello everybody, my name is Shameplicity, and welcome to my very own Slenderman Dead by Daylight chapter concept. Just to get this out of the way, I did create the thumbnail image that you saw when you clicked on this video. It took a really long time to make because I wanted it to seem and feel as legit and authentic as possible. I wanted it to look like a Dead by Daylight official trailer thumbnail image. But today we will be going over my full concept. Check the timestamps below if you would like to check out, the power, the perks. There will be a survivor included in this as well, or any of the specific things that we'll be going over with this concept. Feel free to check the caption, and some timestamps will be there. Let's dive right on in. So first and foremost, as you can see here, this is the thumbnail image that I created. This image is from Slender the Arrival. It is one of the promotional images, so full credit to Blue Owl Studios for the original image. But everything else, all of the actual graphic design choices, the Dead by Daylight logo here, the font, the chapter title, which I will explain in just a moment why I chose this, all of that is my own, and it took me like 3 hours to create just this image alone. It took quite some time. But we will begin by talking about this. This image is essentially would be like a screenshot at the end of the official trailer. That's kind of the idea behind this. And as you can see, the chapter title is Something Awful, the new map is Rosswood Park, the new survivor is Jay, and the new killer is the Slender Man. I want to explain why I chose each of these things before we dive into the actual chapter concept. So first, for the chapter name, Something Awful. For those who don't know, there's a website called somethingawfulforums.com, or forums.somethingawful.com. Anyway, this is where Slenderman was originally created by Eric Knudsen. His username on that website is Victor Surge, but he uploaded a photoshopped image of what he called the Slenderman on a thread there, which we will actually be diving into that thread and a few other things later on in this concept. But I thought that calling the chapter Something Awful, named after the website that the Slenderman was essentially created on, I thought felt very fitting. And as we get into each of these, you'll kind of notice that my goal here for this chapter concept was to basically bring together, culminate all of the different versions of Slenderman. At least some of the main ones, not literally all of them, but there's quite a few of them. Marble Hornets has the Operator. Slender the Arrival and Slender the 8 Pages have the Slenderman. And technically, they are different entities, but every version of the Slenderman that we know is based off of the Slenderman that was created by Eric Knudsen on the Something Awful forum. And that is why I decided to name the killer the Slenderman as opposed to the Operator or the Myth. I know there's quite a few popular names, but I felt like just the Slenderman encapsulates everything, because it is the Slenderman that the Operator is actually based off of, as well as every other version that we see online. Jay is from Marble Hornets. For those who don't know, I'm just going to say right now, major spoilers for Marble Hornets, for Slender the Arrival, for pretty much everything Slenderman related, spoilers throughout this concept, so keep that in mind as we go through. Jay, in my mind, is essentially the most prominent protagonist in any type of Slenderman mythos. And so I felt that that was appropriate. There is Lauren from Slender the Arrival, which was kind of a contender in my mind, but we don't really see much of her at all. We don't have much lore for her. But Jay, on the other hand, we have quite a bit of lore for her. And so Jay felt the most appropriate to me. And then Rosswood Park. This is the primary location in Marble Hornets in which we see the Operator really making influence on Tim and Jay and Alex and a few other individuals, on Hoodie. Quite a few characters in the series. A lot happens in Rosswood Park. Rosswood Park is also the name of the location in which players play Slender the 8 Pages, because that was influenced by Marble Hornets. So to me, that felt like the most appropriate map name. I know there's Oakside Park in Slender the Arrival, but I felt Rosswood Park was kind of the OG best map name. You know what I mean? So yeah, I really enjoy that, and that's what I chose. That's why I chose what I did for each of these. Let's dive on in to the perks. We will do the perks first, then we will read the killer power, and then after that, we will read the lore that I have written for both the Slenderman and Jay, which I'm very proud of. So I have it kind of all written out. Something Awful, Slenderman, Jay, Rosswood Park. So the new killer. Okay, here we are. Can you all see that? Okay, yes you can. Good. The Slenderman. Here are the attributes. Movement speed, 0 meters per second, which we will get into as we kind of dive into the killer's power. He doesn't technically not move at all, but I thought that was kind of gimmicky, and it works with his power, and you'll get it in a moment. Terror radius is 35 meters, which is a pretty big terror radius. Height is tall, obviously. Let's dive into the perks. The power description is pretty long, I'll be honest, but that's just because I wanted to be as descriptive as physically possible. And so it could be halved, honestly, but I wanted to make sure that any questions people might have about the killer power could be answered as we go through it. So here are the Slenderman's 3 unique perks. The first one is Hex to the Ark, which is a Marble Hornets reference. Amidst your presence, they will be unaware of how close death has crept. While inside your terror radius, survivors suffer from the Deafened and Blindness status effects. These effects persist for 10 seconds after leaving your terror radius. This perk remains active for as long as its associated hex totem is standing. Entry number 1. After viewing a couple of tapes and finding nothing unusual, I came across a clip that doesn't fit in with the others. Jay. So I thought this was an interesting idea for those who do not know what the Deafened status effect is. This is a rare status effect that is only featured 2 times in actual Dead by Daylight mechanics. We've got it on the perk Knockout, and we have it on one of the Hag's add-ons. This status effect is like Oblivious, but more so. Oblivious is such that survivors can't hear the killer's terror radius. Deafened, on the other hand, is that survivors cannot hear anything. So this Hex perk, when survivors are inside the killer's terror radius, the killer is essentially a stealth killer. And so this perk makes any killer a stealth killer, and I thought that that was really strong, especially with the added blindness status effect, which is why I made it a Hex perk. I think at face value, this perk doesn't seem to be super strong, but I felt that, if it could make, Blight, essentially, a stealth killer, that was really strong. So I wanted to make it a Hex perk, and then, of course, the name and the quote at the bottom are both Marble Hornets references, so I enjoyed that. Moving on, we have Genesis. And I'll explain why I named it Genesis after we read it together. As escape feels within reach, your influence acclimates, casting anxious doubt on any last morsels of hope. Once the exit gates are powered, your terror radius expands to cover the entire map, and survivors suffer from the Exhausted status effect. These effects persist until an exit gate has been opened and for 10 seconds afterwards. And the quote that I have with that is, "I have plans for you, Kate." Slenderman. So this perk is very much influenced by Slender the Arrival. In Slender the Arrival, when you beat the game, you unlock a final chapter that's titled Genesis. And the Genesis chapter is literally just Slender the 8 pages, but revamped for Slender the Arrival, which I think is really cool. And so, because you have to get to Genesis by beating the game, having some type of effect that was end game, after the last generator completed, felt very appropriate to me. Additionally, the idea of the killer's terror radius spanning the entire map felt very reminiscent to me of Slender the 8 pages, which is what Genesis is, because no matter where you go when you're playing Slender the 8 pages, you can hear him. You can hear his presence, like he's always around the corner. And so I was very proud of the theming for this one. And then, of course, the actual effect of the perk I thought was quite unique. We don't have anything like that in the game yet, and it synergizes quite well with the Slenderman's power, which we'll get into later. But this perk synergizes pretty well with other Terra Radius related perks, so I thought it was unique. Didn't think it was the strongest in the game, but thought it could be fun, so I'm quite proud of it. Moving on to the last perk. So Sanatorium is the last of the Slenderman's perks that I've created, and it's easily the most unique. I'm very proud of it, so let's read it together. Your shadow conjures primal instinct within your victims to escape, but your reach is beyond comprehension. So immediately, Slenderman fans will recognize that the term Sanatorium references Slenderman's Shadow, which is an extension, non-official game that is essentially the same as Slender the 8 Pages, but more maps. Kind of extended the lore a little bit. And I'll dive a little bit more into why I chose this in a moment. When a survivor leaves your terror radius, for the first time, the first survivor that does this, Sanatorium activates. While active, a copy of your terror radius is applied to that survivor, and they gain 3% haste for 25 seconds. During this time, the copied terror radius will spread and apply to any additional survivors who leave the copied terror radius. Each time the copied terror radius successfully spreads before the duration ends, the 25-second duration resets. Your terror radius can spread to no more than 4 unique survivors in succession. In other words, it cannot spread to the same survivor more than once during the perk's duration. Once the duration ends, this perk goes on cooldown for 120 seconds. That's 2 minutes. The quote that I have here is, "With our thoughts, we create our world," which is a line that you can find on a statue in the Sanatorium map on the Slenderman's Shadow game, which I think is really, really cool. So to describe this perk in a bit more detail, because I can understand how it might be a little confusing, the idea is POV, you come into the game, you're a normal terror radius killer, right? The moment the first survivor leaves your terror radius, so you're not going to know that when that happens necessarily, so this isn't a chase-oriented perk, it's just the very first time any survivor leaves your terror radius, a copy of your terror radius is applied to them. So think Dark Devotion, but you still have your terror radius as well. So that survivor has your terror radius, right? And from that point forward, there's 3 survivors who don't have your terror radius. If any of those 3 leave the copied terror radius, so not yours, but the one that has been copied onto that first survivor, if any of those 3 survivors leave that terror radius, the terror radius will spread to them. And it can only spread from that first survivor who had the terror radius. So I think that's important to note as well. It can't spread from the second or third survivor that has the terror radius applied to them. It can only spread from the first survivor that leaves your terror radius. So I thought this was really unique, and it again kind of fits the Slenderman vibe, which I thought was really cool. I also thought that thematically it kind of worked with the Sanatorium Slenderman's Shadow connection. Why? Because Slenderman's Shadow was literally expanding the first Slender the 8 Pages map. It's giving you, I believe it's 9 additional maps total, and so it's kind of spreading Slenderman's influence, right? You get these additional maps, and so the idea of the perk is that his influence, his terror radius, spreads to survivors. Now granted, the 2-minute cooldown means that it's only ever going to happen twice, maybe 3 times per match, and it doesn't last very long either. And it's just a terror radius, so it's not that you're necessarily doing anything to survivors other than now they are wary of each other, which I think is noteworthy. So yeah, I thought this was pretty cool. Let's move on to the survivor perks. For Jay's perks, first we have Boon Proxy. Those under evil's influence can procure a method to diminish its cause. Press and hold the active ability button on the dull or hex totem to bless it and create a boon totem. Slash chimes ring out in a radius of 24 meters. All survivors benefit from the following effects when inside the totem's radius. The auras of 5 totems on the map are revealed to you in white. So that's just all the totems. If a hex totem is standing, the aura of the killer is revealed to you. Only 1 totem can be blessed at a time, by your boon perk at a time. The quote I have for this one is, "He's here. Close all the windows and doors. Just don't let him in." Kate. This is a quote from Slender the Arrival. And I wanted to do something I wanted to quote a proxy, whether it be from Slender the Arrival or Marble Hornets, just because that was the name of the perk. And so I chose Kate from Slender the Arrival. She says this when you kind of look at one of the previous tapes in the game and you see how Kate was essentially ambushed by the Slender Man in her home. And this is what she says when he shows up. So this is a pretty simple perk, but what I love about it is that this is kind of a anti-hex boon, which I think is really cool. So not only can you see all of the boons on the map, but if there's a hex totem standing, it gives you, the added bonus of seeing the killer's aura, which I think is really, really cool. And that kind of gives it some strength, when otherwise it wouldn't have been any better than, like, Boon Illumination by Alan Wake. But I think, it gives you that added bonus if the killer is using a hex, which I think is pretty cool. Now, it won't tell you which totem is the hex, but because you'll be able to see all the totems on the map, it'll give you, especially if you're in a Swift, it'll give you an idea of kind of finding that hex totem and getting rid of it. So, again, I thought that this wasn't like the strongest perk in the game, or potential perk in the game, right? But I thought it was just a fun idea, and I enjoyed it. So that's Jay's first perk, Boon Proxy. His second perk is called Camcorder. This is not necessarily referencing a specific one camcorder in the game. You could say, or camcorder in the Slender mythos. It could be, it could be Jay's camcorder that he has on him all the time. It could be Lauren's camcorder in Slender the Arrival, the camcorder of the unnamed protagonist in Slender the 8 Pages. At the end of the day, everything Slenderman related is done, like the protagonist does it with a camcorder. So I thought that was a good perk name. And so let's go ahead and read this one. I'm very, very proud of this one. With an eye out to reveal dangerous truths, you'll risk insanity for invaluable evidence. While inside the killer's terror radius, this perk activates. So you can kind of see there's a trend with this chapter. A lot of the perks are very terror radius motivated or influenced. You gain 1 token for every 3 seconds spent within the killer's terror radius, up to 10. When you begin any repairing or healing actions, if you have any tokens, consume 1 token per second. The killer's aura is revealed to you until either the repair/heal action is interrupted or all tokens are consumed. Once all tokens are consumed, this perk goes on cooldown for 30 seconds. Once the exit gates are powered, this perk's cooldown is removed. And this is the quote that I have for this perk. Maybe I'll do some research. I've heard there may be a couple more legit Slenderman photographs out there. I'll post them if I find them. This was a post made on the Something Awful forum website by Victor Surge. This was one of his posts, and so I thought that was kind of a fun thing to quote there. And it kind of goes with the idea of the perk as well. So to kind of explain how this one works, because again, it's kind of confusing. So when you're in the killer's terror radius, every 3 seconds you get a token up to 10, meaning that if you're in the killer's terror radius for 30 seconds, you'll get 10 tokens. At any point after that, no matter how many tokens you have, if you start repairing a generator or healing someone, every 1 second of doing that, you'll spend a token, and you'll see the killer's aura for that duration. So basically that just means that if you get the tokens all the way up to 10, when you start repairing a generator, you'll see the killer's aura for 10 seconds. Or if you start healing someone, you'll see them for 10 seconds. And so it's not insane, but I like the idea because 10 seconds is a decent amount of time, especially if you're healing and you see that the killer starts heading your way, you can preemptively get out of there. You know what I mean? So I thought this was interesting. And then the last gimmick here was that once the exit gates are powered, the perk's cooldown is removed. Now, obviously, you can't repair generators when the exit gates are powered, but you can still heal survivors. So the idea with this one is that if you've got tokens, there is no cooldown, meaning that anytime you're in the killer's terror radius, you're always going to be getting tokens up to 10. And even after you heal someone, you use those tokens, you see the killer terror radius, there's no cooldown, so you can immediately get those tokens back if you're in the killer's terror radius. And I felt that this one, this perk, Camcorder, went really well, like it synergized quite well with Genesis on the Slender Man, because this one, Terror Radius covers the whole map when the exit gates are powered. So Camcorder is kind of a direct counter to that, because if the Terror Radius is covering the entire map, and there's no cooldown on Camcorder at the end of the game when the exit gates are powered, then you're always going to be, like, even when you use your tokens, your 10 tokens, healing someone to see the killer's aura, immediately you're going to get your tokens back. So both perks, they kind of go off of each other. The last J perk, and I'm very proud of this one, is called Inpatient. So not like, oh, I'm impatient with you, but inpatient as in like an inpatient at a hospital being treated. So this one is in direct reference to Tim in Marble Hornets. He was, again, spoilers, he was a patient at the abandoned hospital there in Rosswood Park, and so I wanted this one to kind of be reminiscent of that. Your oppressor may be aware of your trauma, but they will become subject to it. While inside the killer's terror radius, this perk activates, and remains active for 5 seconds after leaving the radius. This perk deactivates while in chase. While active, the killer's terror radius pounds in their own ears, obscuring sounds made by generator repairs, grunts of pain, and footsteps by all survivors. Once you leave the killer's terror radius, this perk goes on cooldown for 30 seconds. And the quote I have that many people will recognize is from the very last entry of Marble Hornets, entry 87, I believe it is. Everything is fine. Tim. So this perk, I think, is really, really cool. It essentially, the idea is you're in the killer's terror radius. Like, the moment you enter it, they start hearing their own terror radius as though they were pretty close to themselves, if that makes sense. And it's meant to be, the idea is that the terror radius would be loud enough that they could not hear, like, let's say they're on the game, right? And there's a generator below them, so they see that aura. The killer's going, a survivor with this perk enters their terror radius, and all of a sudden they hear their own terror radius pounding in their ears pretty decently loud. Not so loud that it's, like, horrible, but loud enough that if they were, like, on the second floor of the game above a gen, they wouldn't be able to hear the generator's repair progress. And so I thought this, and then same thing for healing. Let's say that the killer is on Midwich Elementary School and is passing a classroom and 2 survivors are healing nearby. Normally the killer would hear that, but with someone using this perk, the killer would not be able to hear them healing, in the room next door. So I thought this was a very unique idea that has never been done before, which I really loved. So yeah, there's Inpatient. There's all the perks. I'm super, super proud of them. There's one more thing I want to reference that I totally forgot to say before this moment, and that is about one of the killer perks, specifically Genesis. So Genesis, your terror radius covers the entire map, and survivors are afflicted with the exhausted status effect. And this happens right when the last gen pops. So what that means is that this perk is a direct counter to Adrenaline, which I'm really, really proud of. There aren't too many perks that directly counter that, or like assuredly counter Adrenaline, because Adrenaline is such a strong perk. But this is a perk that directly counters it, because the moment the last gen pops, all survivors are exhausted until the exit gates are powered, which I think is really, really cool, because there are no perks that currently do that. We are now going to dive into the Slenderman's power, which I am very, very proud of. I will say it's a decently long description, but it could be halved in length. Like, technically, like, if it came to the game, right, it could be halved in length. But you know how in many of the killer power descriptions, there are details that are left out. Like, it gives you the general description, but there are certain things it just doesn't tell you. And so this, I wanted to write it in such a way that any questions that people might have while we're reading through it should be answered. Now, there may still very well be questions afterwards, and if you're watching on YouTube, please ask your questions in the comments. Give your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. But without further ado, let's absolutely dive on in, shall we? The name of the Slenderman's power is Operator's Arrival, which is a reference, obviously, to both Marble Hornets, the Operator, and Slender, the Arrival. So I thought that was kind of a fun combination. Here's kind of the quote at the beginning of the power. Distorting reality, its presence causes sacrificial hooks to be evicted from the trial. New realms enter the minds of unassuming victims, inflicting the unknown upon the familiar. Under the influence of faceless terror, all are bound to inevitable, unavoidable darkness. So yeah, a little hint there. This will have to do with hooks, which I think is kind of fun. During the trial, the Slenderman's physical figure will be unable to move, remaining stationary. Anytime any number of survivors view the Slenderman, it will appear to be looking directly at each individual survivor from their respective POV. Additionally, the Slenderman's physical figure is not visible to survivors outside of its terror radius. So, as we go through this whole power, I'll stop a few times here and there and just kind of explain what I mean. So for this one, this is kind of just for aesthetic purposes. Let's say you've got 3 survivors. Like the Slenderman is in like a big open space, right? And there are 3 survivors within his terror radius, all of which can see him, but they're like in different positions around the Slenderman. From their respective POVs, like from their position, it will seem as though the Slenderman is looking at them, even though he might not be. And that's just for aesthetic choices, really, but I thought that was kind of fun, so that everyone feels as though they're always being watched by the Slenderman, which I thought was cool. Moving on, whether Always Watches is active or not, which we will get to that special ability in a moment. Survivors who view the Slenderman's physical figure will be revealed by Killer Instinct, afflicted with increasing distorted, static-filled vision, and will become hindered by 3% until the Slenderman is no longer in view. Should a survivor view the Slenderman's physical figure for a consecutive 5 seconds, that survivor will become blinded by full static-filled vision for 3 seconds. So, the idea here is that you don't want to look at the Slenderman for too long, or you will be blinded for a few seconds. And we'll get into everything else. But that's kind of just the base kit here. Moving on to his special abilities. Special ability Always Watches. The duration is 15 seconds, and the cooldown is 10 seconds. Press the power button while the power gauge is full to activate Always Watches. While active, the Slenderman will begin to teleport at 5 meters per second, moving like the spirit while she's phasing. So this, imagine it, like if you're playing the Slenderman, imagine this being almost exactly like the spirit. Like you're standing still, and then you start phasing, but in this case, it's teleporting. Okay? While teleporting, Slenderman's physical figure will remain in its initial position, also like the spirit, like, when she's phasing, she, just looks like she's standing there, and then she, disappears and appears wherever she was phasing to. Same thing with the Slenderman here. Until Always Watches duration ends or is manually ended by pressing the power button again. So this is, just a teleport ability, but once he's done teleporting, again, he can't move. He's just stuck there, wherever he ends teleporting. Additionally, while active, the Slenderman can move through pallets, windows, and breakable walls. Lastly, while active, the Slenderman cannot see survivors or perceive scratch marks, footsteps, pools of blood, or grunts of pain made by survivors. So, the spirit, when she's phasing, she can kind of perceive scratch marks and other things that survivors do. She can hear them. The Slenderman, while he's teleporting, he can go through windows, pallets, and breakable walls, but the downside is that he cannot perceive survivors at all, in any way. By no means is he able to perceive survivors. So that's his teleporting ability. Special ability Can't Run. In both of these names, Can't Run and Always Watches are references to phrases that are written on pages that you collect in Slender the 8 pages. While Always Watches is not active, in other words, while you're not teleporting, it's like when you're just standing there still, because you can't move if you're not teleporting, press the attack button to activate Can't Run. Upon activation, a few foggy black tendrils will permeate from the Slenderman's back, mostly just for aesthetics. The Slenderman takes control of one tendril. This tendril, I didn't write it here, but it's a little bigger than the others. This tendril moves at 4.4 meters per second, so it's like a slower killer. Imagine Chucky's third-person POV on Knight sending out a guard, but it moves like a normal killer. It's like, when you're playing the Knight, you send out a guard, you have this path that you take or whatever. Imagine that, but it's third person, so you see the end of the tendril, and you just move like a normal killer. Slenderman's terror radius emits from its physical figure, not from this tendril. The controlled tendril cannot be seen by survivors who are outside of the Slenderman's terror radius, and it cannot move outside of the Slenderman's terror radius. Additionally, it is slowed by 4 meters per second for 2 seconds while passing through windows or dropped pallets, and cannot pass through breakable walls. The Slenderman, through this controlled tendril, can break down pallets and breakable walls. Normal break time. So basically, you know, you're standing still, you press the attack button, you take control of this tendril in third person, start moving around, but you can't move outside of the Slenderman's terror radius, and you can go over windows, over pallets, but you can't go through breakable walls. But you can break those things like a normal killer would in normal break time. While in control of the tendril, the Slenderman is able to see survivors and initiate chase through it. While the tendril cannot attack survivors in a traditional sense, keeping uninterrupted physical contact with the survivor for 3 seconds will cause the survivor to lose a health state, resulting in the tendril being slowed as any killer would during a basic attack cooldown. Can't run is deactivated by pressing the attack button again. So yeah, I thought that this was a really interesting way for the Slenderman to like not move, to kind of be stationary, as he is in Slender the 8 Pages. I know he moves in Slender the Arrival, but I didn't really want to replicate that. I just wanted him to be stationary, and I thought that him controlling a tendril, that keeping contact with a survivor for 3 seconds, injuring them, and then being slowed down, having to catch back up, I thought that this was an interesting way for him to chase survivors, injure them, down them, without actually, like, moving. So kind of the gimmick here is, like, let's say you're controlling Slenderman, you're teleporting right, and then you drop yourself in the middle of a loop, and there's a survivor there. You take control of a tendril, and if they try to, loop you at this loop, the Slenderman will be standing in that loop while you're chasing them with this tendril, which means every time they look at the Slenderman, like the physical figure, their vision will get distorted, as mentioned beforehand. So there's kind of some anti-loop abilities that you can kind of tie in between the always watches and the can't run abilities, which I think is pretty cool. And then there's one last ability here. I know it's kind of a lot, but who cares? It's a fan-made concept. And his last special ability is the 8 Pages. Of course, there had to be something in regard to pages in his power. Duration until all 8 pages are found. Cooldown, only 2 survivors can be banished at a time. The Slenderman's very presence distorts reality by rebelling against the entity, evicting sacrificial hooks from the trial entirely. While Can't Run is active, and a survivor is in the dying state, so like POV, you're controlling the tendril and you've downed a survivor, press and hold the secondary ability button while over the downed survivor to activate the 8 pages. Once activated, the survivor will be lifted up and become encased by multiple black tendrils over the course of 3 seconds, banishing the survivor to the Slenderman's personal mini-realm, Oakside Park. So think of this as similar to Pyramid Head, like he downs a survivor who's tormented, he can send them to a Cage of Atonement. Think of this as similar, except you're controlling the tendril, and this is the only way, that you can hook survivors. This mini-realm is the same size as the Void introduced during the 2023 Haunted by Daylight event, so it's kind of small, it's not very big. Also, this realm would include only 4 of the 10 key landmarks featured in Slender the 8 Pages, as the mini-realm wouldn't be big enough to feature all of them. The 4 landmarks would be generated at random, changing each time a survivor is sent there. So this is just about the aesthetics of the mini-realm Oakside Park that you're sent to when you're essentially hooked. Only 2 survivors can be banished to Oakside Park at a given time. Banishing a survivor is equivalent to a hook stage. And then I made a note here about basically like the idea of, like, you know, when a killer typically picks up a survivor, another survivor can blind them and stun them. This is a note I made about that. Survivors who successfully stun or blind the Slenderman's physical figure during the 8 pages 3-second activation time will stun the tendril that he's controlling, causing the Slenderman to drop the survivor. Survivors, of course, risk becoming blinded themselves by looking at the Slenderman's physical figure for too long in order to achieve this. So there's just a comment about that. When a survivor is banished to Oakside Park, they must find and collect 8 pages around the mini-realm in order to return to the trial. The survivor is given 3% haste while banished to Oakside Park. Pages can be picked up instantly when interacted with. Once the first page is collected, one of the Slenderman's proxies will spawn. And this could be Kate, Charlie, Hoodie, or Masky. Kate and Charlie are both from Slender the Arrival, and Hoodie and Masky are both from Marble Hornets. Hunting the survivor and jump scaring them around corners more frequently as they amass more pages. The proxy cannot inflict any direct effects upon the survivor aside from the occasional scare, so they're kind of just aesthetic, but I thought it was kind of cool. While banished to Oakside Park, that survivor's portrait on the HUD becomes full of static, distorting the image. Once the first page is collected, a number 1 will be displayed on that survivor's HUD portrait for their teammates to see. This number increases up to 8 as pages are collected, allowing all survivors to see the progress of the banished survivor. Once 8 pages are collected, a Slenderman AI will appear behind the banished survivor, causing their vision to briefly fill with static. After 3 seconds, the survivor returns to the trial in the injured state with 20 seconds of endurance at the same location they were banished. That survivor's HUD portrait returns to normal. So they collect the 8th page, and kind of like in Slender the 8 pages, if you get the 8th page, like, you're turned around and Slender gets you. But in this case, you're just turned around and Slender, like, sends you back to the trial. I wanted to do the 20 seconds of endurance just because if the Slender player remembers where he banished a survivor, he could very easily just tunnel super fast because he knows where they're going to come back after they get the 8 pages. So I wanted to give them some extra endurance. Each time a unique survivor collects 8 pages and returns to the trial, the Slenderman's terror radius, which is 35 meters at the start of the trial, increases by 5 meters up to a maximum of 55 meters. And so this kind of goes along with the aesthetic that, again, in Slender the 8 pages, the more pages you get, the more aggressive he gets. And so in this case, his terror radius expands. The second time a survivor is banished to Oakside Park, in other words, they're on struggle phase, 2 proxies will spawn, increasing the frequency of jump scares as the survivor collects more pages. So 2 instead of 1. The third and final time a survivor is banished to Oakside Park, i.e. they're on Death Hook, a short cutscene will play during which all 4 previously mentioned proxies will contribute to a unique mori, killing the survivor and offering the survivor's corpse as a sacrifice to the Slenderman as opposed to the entity. Once the survivor has been killed, their portrait on the survivor HUD is not changed to a skull, but rather is desaturated and covered by the Marble Hornets logo, which I thought would be kind of just a fun little thing there. So that's the power. Let me go ahead and provide like a super brief summary for this power, because I know that the description is a little complicated. So basically, the Slenderman normally can't move, and survivors, when they look at him, their screen is full of static, and if they look at him for too long, they'll be blinded for a few seconds. The Slenderman can teleport, and it's very similar to that of the Spirit. When the Spirit is phasing where she started phasing, like, her physical figure stays there. Same thing for the Slenderman. The difference is that when the Slenderman is done teleporting, he stays stationary, again, unlike the Spirit who moves like normal. Slenderman can emit a black tendril, and this is how he chases and can attack survivors. The tendril moves at 4.4 meters per second, so kind of like a slow killer. It can go over pallets, over windows. It cannot go through breakable walls, though. When it does, it's slowed down, and it can break pallets and breakable walls like a normal break time. If the tendril maintains physical contact with the survivor for 3 consecutive seconds while in chase, they will be injured, and then it's slowed down like a normal killer would after a basic attack. And then through this tendril, Slenderman can injure and down survivors. The last part of the Slenderman's power is that he can activate what's called the 8 pages. When he has downed a survivor with his tendril, and by the way, the tendril cannot go outside of his terror radius. So when he activates this tendril, that moves around, and he controls it. And it's like third person, by the way. Imagine like Chucky, kind of, but it's a tendril that you're moving around, right? When he downs a survivor, he can activate the 8 pages. A bunch of tendrils will encase the survivor over a few seconds, and they are sent to a mini realm called Oakside Park. This is the same size as the mini realm that was in the Haunted by Daylight event. So it's pretty small, and it looks like the map on Slender, the 8 pages. If y'all are familiar with that, it's basically the same thing but smaller. They go there, they have to collect 8 pages in order to return back to the trial, and this counts as a hook stage. There are no hooks on the map when Slenderman spawns. That's kind of like his biggest gimmick. He just gets rid of hooks. And he sends survivors to this map instead of hooking them. Survivors, while they're in this little mini map, they have to collect 8 pages. They have haste while doing so they can do it rather quickly. They can pick up pages instantly, and there will be a proxy in the map, one of Slenderman's proxies, either Charlie, Kate, Masky, or Hoodie. The proxies don't actually do anything to the survivor, they just jump scare them, like around corners, so just aesthetics. And survivors who are not in the realms, like if a survivor is banished to the realm, other survivors can see on the HUD that they've been banished there, and there will be a number on their portrait that increases up to 8 as they collect more pages. Once they get 8 pages, they come back to the trial in the injured state, in the same place they were banished, with 20 seconds of endurance, rather than just 10. And that's pretty much it. Once the Slenderman banishes a survivor a 3rd time to Oakside Park, i.e. they're on Death Hook, the 4 proxies will basically mori will kill the survivor in that realm. Which would be pretty cool too. And then their logo on the HUD, instead of just turning to a skull, it's covered in the Marble Hornets logo, which I think was kind of fun. So if on YouTube you're just watching the power summary, which I just said, it might be a little confusing. I apologize. Feel free to go back and watch as I read through the whole thing and kind of describe it. Hopefully it makes some sense. I spent a frick of a long time making this power, and I'm very proud of it. It combines the idea of Slenderman technically not moving. In Slender the Arrival, he claims Charlie with these tendrils, and so that's kind of where the attack ability comes into play, the can't run ability, where you control this tendril within your terror radius. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And of course I wanted to also include the 8 pages in some way, which I feel I was able to do. So yeah, it might seem kind of complicated, but I promise if you kind of just put it all together, he can't move, but he can teleport. You don't want to look at him. He can injure you with his tendril, and he can send you, when he downs you, to this mini realm instead of hooking you, where you have to collect 8 pages. So that's basically it. It's a little complicated, but feel free to comment below what you think of the power and the perks. I'm very, very proud of them. It took me a long time to make these. But with that being said, let's move on to the lore, because I wrote a small piece of lore for both the Slenderman and Jay. We'll read Jay's lore first. No amount of evidence could save him. Oh, and by the way, big spoilers for Marble Hornets. Huge spoilers for Marble Hornets. If you are wanting to watch the web series and you have not, skip this. Do not watch this, because this is big, big spoilers. For Jay specifically. No amount of evidence could save him. No amount of recording, searching, chasing, none of these things were enough to revert the effects of a bullet wound. Stumbling into a vacant side room, he fell to the floor, losing blood faster than he knew what to conclude. The operator was at hand. He knew. How? It didn't matter, he just knew. His death was in its hands. Its hands, however, never arrived. All but unconscious, he wondered at why everything had come to such a bleak end. The end was not in that moment, though he was not aware of this as black fog invaded the room, seeping across the floor. As the unnatural fog thickened, he finally lost vision, and perhaps all sensory units. Waking up by a warm campfire was not at all on his list of expectations, after what he assumed was a tragic end. The surrounding trees were familiar, yet different. Bullet wound healed. Perhaps he was saved. Or perhaps, as he bore witness to the others, sullied in countless layers of dried blood, he had been damned. Damned to face the operator. No, more than the operator. A culmination of its mythos. Whoever and whatever he was to face, his camcorder was all but useless in this vacant space. Unfamiliar faces, both aiming to aid and hinder, is what that should say. My bad, I'll fix it later. Both aiming to aid and hinder were the only experiences left for him. There was no returning to the set of Marble Hornets. Not anymore. Everything was not fine. So, not incredible. I didn't spend a ton of time writing this, but I thought it was pretty good for Jay. And now we will go ahead and read the lore for the Slender Man. June 10th, 2009. Create Paranormal Images, a popular thread on somethingawful.com, received an image similar to those already shared. Children on a playground. One girl closer than the others. Everything mostly normal. In place. Forum user Victor Surge created and subsequently submitted a creature, oblivious to the inevitable spread and popularity of his idea. Nonetheless, soon the vast totality of Internet explorers and YouTube watchers became keenly aware of its presence. June 19th, 2009. Marble Hornets was born on the same Something Awful forum as the creature by which the web series was inspired. Millions of views accumulated over the following months and years, with a comic series in tow. The operator had made its impact. June 26th, 2012. Slender. Later entitled Slender the 8 Pages. Young and old around the world had their first hands-on experience of the fear this being inspired. August 12th, 2012. Slenderman's Shadow. An ever-expanding mythos bloomed into additional atmospheric locations. Sanatorium, hospice, elementary, mansion, claustrophobia, 7th Street, prison, carnival, Christmas special. March 26th, 2013. Slender the Arrival. With Eric, Victor Surge, Knudsen, and the creators of Marble Hornets brought together as producers, a full-fledged gaming story was crafted. Its influence was now worldwide, spanning across multiple online forums, video series, games, and even news anchors. But none of it was real. An idea is formless, but so is our fear. Fear becomes baseless when it takes shape. The unknown will always outweigh the tangible. From both everywhere and nowhere, it arrives, uninvited. But it is not unknown. It has a name. The Slender Man. So there we have it. There's the lore for both Jay and the Slender Man, as well as the base power and perk designs. I hope that y'all love it. I am really, really proud of this. And again, please, 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 if you're watching on YouTube, share your comments and ideas, critiques, whatever, in the comments below. I would love, love, love to hear them. I know that this isn't perfect, but I did spend a lot of time on it, especially this thumbnail image and this screenshot image took me so freaking long to make. But I'm very, very proud of it, like I said. So yeah, hope it wasn't too crazy confusing. I hope it makes some sense. And hopefully we see Slenderman in Dead by Daylight at some point. He is my dream license, which is why I made this. And then lastly, I will be making more concepts like this in the future. The next one that I will be making is kind of a very niche license that will never make it into the game. It's one of my favorite horror movies of all time. It got me into the horror genre. It's called The Woman in Black. If any of you know what that is, awesome. Daniel Radcliffe played the main character, Arthur Kipps. So I will be making a similar video for that as well sometime in the future. But with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Please leave your thoughts down below. And again, have courage and be kind. And I will see y'all in the next Dead by Daylight concept video that I create for The Woman in Black and onwards. And please, give me suggestions if there's any concepts that you'd like me to make in this format, and to make one of these thumbnails for. Let me know. I would love to. And again, with that, have courage and be kind. I will see you in the next one. Peace out.